Living in solitude requires being either a beast or a god, says Aristotle. But Nietzsche, with his ruthless irony, reminds us of a third possibility, being both. And perhaps he also suggests something more, that solitude is not just a state, but a destiny, an inevitable condition for those who seek a truth that the crowd cannot offer. It is a narrow path, walked by those who choose to distance themselves from the deafening noise of conventions, by those who prefer the uncertainty of introspection over the security of the known. The individual has always struggled not to be absorbed by the tribe. If you try, you will often be alone and sometimes afraid. But no price is too high for the privilege of being yourself, Nietzsche reminds us. Solitude has been a recurring theme in the history of philosophy. For some, it is a punishment, for others, a virtue. Modern science tells us that chronic loneliness can be as harmful to health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. However, not everyone who is alone feels lonely. Henry David Thoreau, in his retreat at Walden Pond, wrote, "I never felt lonely here. I never found a companion as friendly as solitude." But is it possible that solitude is more than just an emotional state? Could it also be a gateway to a deeper perception of life, a dimension where thought and consciousness expand beyond the limitations imposed by social interaction? So why do some suffer in solitude while others thrive? The answer lies in the difference between solitude and isolation. The former is a choice, the latter a sentence. But even choice carries a price. Isolating oneself from the world's noise also means losing the warmth of human contact. It means facing, without distractions, the vastness of one's own being. Those who choose solitude must be prepared to confront the immensity of their own self without the reassuring echo of other voices. Because in that silence, what was once scattered begins to take shape. Unresolved fears, buried memories, unconfessable desires. Nietzsche understood this well. He wrote that when he is among the crowd, he lives like others, thinks like others. Over time, he feels that they strip him of his own being, forcing him to be someone he is not. That is why he needs the desert, the absence of others' gaze, to rediscover himself. But it is not easy to renounce the gaze of the other. Without it, one becomes their own judge, their own executioner. Solitude can liberate, but it can also destroy. It is a razor's edge where only those who know how to maintain balance can walk without falling into the abyss. He who fights with monsters should be careful not to become one himself. And if you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you. It is not only philosophers who have understood the power of solitude. Jesus spent 40 days in the desert before beginning his ministry. Buddha attained enlightenment under the fig tree, isolated from the world. Moses found his destiny at the top of a mountain, far from the crowd. For them, solitude was not a prison, but a portal to knowledge and transformation. But what happens when silence does not reveal answers, but more questions? What happens when solitude does not bring clarity, but an ever-deepening abyss? Admiral Richard Byrd spent a winter alone in Antarctica, facing sub-zero temperatures and endless nights. In his book Alone, he wrote, "Solitude is greater than I anticipated. My values are changing, and many things that were previously confused in my mind now seem to crystallize." But he also admitted to the terror of absolute solitude, the fear of never hearing another human voice again, the anguish of having no one with whom to share even a fleeting thought. Those who immerse themselves in prolonged solitude discover that they not only face the absence of others, but also their own emotional and psychological nakedness. History offers us other examples of individuals who found in solitude an inner battlefield. Saint Anthony the Great, one of the first Christian monks, withdrew into the Egyptian desert and lived decades in complete solitude, facing visions and temptations he interpreted as divine tests. In the Middle Ages, anchorites isolated themselves in tiny cells attached to churches, renouncing human contact to immerse themselves in contemplation. Even in literature, characters like Robinson Crusoe from Daniel Defoe embody the struggle between the need for survival and the internal transformation imposed by isolation. Artists have also found in solitude an inexhaustible source of inspiration. Vincent van Gogh, in his isolation, wrote extensive letters to his brother Theo, describing his struggle with loneliness and madness, but also his connection to art. Emily Dickinson, the enigmatic American poet, lived almost entirely secluded in her home, withdrawing from the outside world to write verses that still resonate with overwhelming depth today. Beethoven, when deafness separated him from the rest of humanity, took refuge in music, composing some of his most magnificent works in absolute silence. Schopenhauer expressed it with brutal clarity. A man can only be himself when he is alone, and if he does not love solitude, he will not love freedom, because only when he is alone is he truly free. But he also warns us that most of humanity is not prepared for that freedom. We live surrounded by walls of noise, distractions, false connections, because we fear what we will find if silence completely envelops us. Perhaps that is why solitude has become either a luxury or a punishment, depending on the perspective from which it is viewed. But solitude is not easy. It requires courage. It requires accepting silence, facing the thoughts that society helps us repress. Philip Koch calls it tuning into oneself, a state where desires, fears, and inner conflicts emerge without censorship. In this state, hidden traumas resurface, personal ghosts speak. Solitude, if fully embraced, can be a hell before it is a blessing, and perhaps that hell is necessary. Perhaps only when one has descended into the darkest depths of oneself can one emerge with new understanding. It is no coincidence that many ancient societies used solitude as a rite of passage. Among the Tarahumara of Mexico, solitude is not seen as a problem, but as a path to maturity. A 6-year-old child may disappear into the mountains with only a ration of pinole, not seeing anyone for days or weeks. In other cultures, young people were sent alone into the forest as a test of adulthood. If they survived, they returned, transformed, not only physically, but with a deeper understanding of themselves. But today, do we dare to face a similar trial? Do we dare to turn off the screens, disconnect the noise, and be alone with ourselves? Perhaps the real question is not whether we can endure solitude, but whether we can endure ourselves within it. Solitude does not transform on its own. What transforms is what we do with it. Do we become beasts, gods, or both? If this video resonated with you, leave a comment, share your experience, and subscribe to continue exploring the depths of existence together.